As you can see, this is a presentation about multi-cloud orchestration. It says demo, which absolutely it will be, and best practices. As we go through, I'm just going to mention, I'm going to make absolute statements about best practices. What we're discovering is that there are things that you can do very well, there are things that you can do badly, but there's no absolute definitive. It will vary from organization to organization and the approach they take. So I'll just point out things that we've discovered, we've worked with customers to do when using our product. Obviously, this is going to be tied around the Morpheus product and the way we work, and which we feel is a very proper and agile way to work with your multi-cloud as you move forward into the great new frontier of multi-cloud orchestration. Like I say, just a few slides, so I'd like to get going with that. And just really, why is this becoming important? Well, there's a lot of things going on in the world, and agility and speed to market is definitely one of those. You know, our traditional markets have changed over the years, so people are needing to be faster and faster to market. That could be to customers, but also internally. And for IT departments, has really changed rapidly over the last few years. Went through the hypervised stage, and now the hypervisor has really driven the ability to deploy workloads anywhere. And then the cloud has become a thing where we can very quickly go and put workloads out there. That's actually in a lot of cases put a lot of pressure on the IT organizations to, first of all, keep up. You know, things are much easier to do with a lot of the technologies that are out there today, and deliver to the business quicker and at a lower cost point. And that's what these companies discovered. These are just some example companies that we have done business with and are doing business with at the moment, who have looked at their internal infrastructures and have made the decision, A, to become more cloud-like themselves so they could deliver services more quickly, but also then embrace the world of multi-cloud to allow them to either move entirely into the public cloud to remove their requirement on any internal infrastructure, or probably more likely have a mix of internal and external clouds, so this hybrid cloud model, and then positioning workloads where it makes sense. So, you know, very secure private company data on large infrastructure systems internally, whereas the more customer-facing, agile, rapid change applications out on public cloud. The question is, how do you manage all of that? And how do you keep on top of all of that? But what we're finding is that organizations are having to do this. There's, you know, people are looking to do this type of thing, be more agile, embrace DevOps, be more cloud aware, but there is a gap that the older systems are still holding people back. And this is really the first area of sort of recommendation, is if you start embracing multi-cloud, is you have to accept that it's going to be an agile way of working. You're going to want to have to support the guys that are using it in a very agile way, and that they can use it very quickly. There's no point in giving them access to, for example, Amazon, and they're saying, yes, but you still need to go through our internal processes and it will take you 3 weeks to provision a machine up there. That's not what it's about. You'll start to lose control. We've seen this in organizations where what happens is then you get teams going off, creating their own clouds, putting their own accounts together on AWS, and starting to provision their own infrastructure outside of the control of core IT. And that just then leads to problems. It will lead to cost overruns and people spending more than they should be, and also potentially doing things that they shouldn't be on the public cloud. But part of your problem will be, as you're running an internal IT infrastructure, is that you know that there's a lot of moving parts, and it's not just as easy as spinning up a machine or group of machines or a set of containers, or going and getting platform as a service, databases, for example, up on the cloud. There has to be some control. There has to be integration into existing tools. There has to be governance and control. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes as well. So using and making sure you still use a lot of your existing systems is probably very important, and be able to orchestrate those and work with those is going to be a key function of any decisions you make. You want your engineers, your developers using the agreed tools so that you don't have every team doing something in a different way. If they're doing pipeline development, infrastructure as code, make sure that you're supporting their tool set rather than them having to keep going and getting new tool sets every time they want to do something individual. Do you need to tie into ITSM tools, CMDB type tools, to keep track of assets? Just because they're running up on Amazon or Azure or Google doesn't mean they're not an asset. And you need to understand, maybe for governance and control reasons, that and auditing what was running where and when. So tying into your CMDBs may be very important. But this cobweb, this maze of technologies that can make the adoption of public cloud or hybrid cloud or multi-cloud strategies complex and more difficult than it would appear at first pass. And if you don't get this right, it will cause you problems down the line. So we'll have a look at ways of addressing that going forward. But really, what you need to do is make this systematic, and what you want to do is move through the stages, because you may have heard the term DevOps, and it may not be exactly what you're heading towards, but with multi-cloud, it's actually sort of the way you're going, maybe if you don't even realize it, because you are going to start getting into the world of pushing code or users provisioning their own infrastructure much more rapidly and doing things themselves, and reducing the reliance on just having an infrastructure operational team. So you'll probably stop somewhere on that line that works for you, but it's that journey to that position and how you do it. And we think there are 4 main areas, and again we'll talk about some of the areas here. But analytics, this is something we see time and time again, is you have your internal infrastructure today, you understand how it works, you know how much it costs. There was a capital investment and you needed to get that infrastructure stood up, and you know the amount of resource, and you are putting workloads on there. But what happens? How do you make sure that you're not putting infrastructure up there that is wasteful, too big? How do you make sure that as you need more, that you get the right size of additional infrastructure? And that ties into the public cloud as well. That becomes this unlimited resource, but understanding that limited resource and understanding how much you're spending there is very important. So having analytics is a key thing to understanding what have you got today, but also as you move forward, what are you spending and who's spending it and where is going to be a key thing. Otherwise, you'll get those unexpected bills. Governance and control, one of my pets ones. I think this is massively important. We talked about the fact that you're going to want to give people a more agile approach to using infrastructure. That's one of the many benefits of using public cloud. But it's also one of its drawbacks. Everybody gets a log on, they can just go off and start creating what they want. It's very hard to control it unless you treat it, as I said earlier, like the traditional infrastructure, which will just then not really drive the benefits that you could get from it. But governance control is accessing it in a very secure way, in a managed way, and then controlling who deploys what, where, when, for how long is an important part of this multi-cloud capability. Automation, again, this process as you move down this world, the ability to create application stacks, get them spun up, have them created in the way that you want very rapidly, and also then tying into the external tools that you need to go and get IP addresses, update the CMDB, run scripts that provision the correct agents on the machine that you need for your monitoring, for your antivirus, etc., should all be something that is done as part of the process, not something you have to keep stopping and thinking about. And then production. So we're going to make getting workloads easier to do. It's then how do you manage that? We've seen issues here where you now have 2, 3, 4 hypervisors that you're trying to use. And what you need to do is give a standardized way, simplified way for people to get access to those and manage those in a standardized way. So they're not having to learn a different cloud for every process. And if you make that simple enough, then you can actually push some of that requirement down to the guys that are actually using the servers. So that's where we get that crossover with the DevOps piece. Just a quick slide about Morpheus. I'm going to get into the demo in a moment, but just what you're going to see in a moment is really Morpheus is around self-service, but then also all of those areas that I've just been talking about. So we have the ability to do self-service delivery, self-service management, but we also have tie into a number of capabilities that you need in this process. You know, how do you get the standardized builds, the orchestration to make sure that people are deploying the right machines, they're using the correct version of CentOS or Windows, they're using the correct applications for your business, and you know, that are agreed, that can be supported by your teams. So, you know, the build tools, the blueprinting, for etc., is very, very important, and Morpheus provides those. And around the edge here, you can see the multiple different things that can be done, and Morpheus has capability in all of these spaces, which we're going to look at. But also what we do, and this is a key thing, if you remember back to the maze diagram, what we can also do is integrate with and orchestrate third-party tools as well that are probably already in use in your organization. So, you know, scripting is a very important one as you move forward. So you may already have Ansible, for example, seems to be popular at the moment as a config management tool. You can use Morpheus without Ansible, absolutely, and we can do many things that you can do in that space without Ansible, but it's a great addition to the catalog. It logs it connects in, and you can use it, and add the two together, make a very powerful combination. ServiceNow integration for your CMDB, networking seems to be becoming, or is becoming, more and more important as you're trying to do things across multi-cloud as well. So you can see there, this is not an extensive list, this is some of the examples of the things that we can integrate with. And finally, what we're trying to do is do that across multi-cloud. So we're going to do this across your private cloud, your internal infrastructure, whatever you're running today, potentially. I think we cover off most major hypervisors today. But what we also do is then integrate into the public cloud as well. And so we can give you this great combination of the hybrid cloud capability. Maybe start with public or private cloud today, make sure you're making it more cloud-like, which I think is an important step in this space of helping people move to multi-cloud, and then bring in capabilities that you expect from public cloud, things like agility, but also cost management. So how much do things cost? Put a price on things as your users are using them, and then you can start budgeting, and then moving that into the public cloud as well for them to then expand their workload, and maybe eventually move entirely into the public cloud. But you can make this quite a seamless process. And something I haven't touched on at all yet, but you'll see the word there is container, the right-hand arrow, and serverless. This is where you're going to be heading if you go down this route. Containerization, Docker, Kubernetes, you may already be doing something in this space, but Morpheus fully supports that. And as we move into the world of serverless, that is something that we are starting to work on already, and will have capability of in the near future. So, summary of this, what we've been doing, you know, faster deployments, make it very easy. You don't want to hold yourself back. Don't, you know, cause problems on your internal infrastructure by not making it cloud. Equally, don't make your public cloud like your internal infrastructure. It's getting that balance and mix correct. It's going to be very important. Greater agility, the ability to, I think this has been an ongoing thing for IT for many, many years, is trying to be as open as possible so you don't get tied into any one particular space. You know, one of the great things about public cloud is the great range of things that you can do. One of the downsides is that some of those things are very cloud specific and only available on particular clouds. You can tie yourself into those, which may be a direction you want to go. But we would probably recommend that you have a serious think about that, just that you can keep it going. And less business risk is the ability to, you know, again, what we're finding, another recommendation here, I guess, is we're finding that a lot of organizations at the moment are trying to do this with a lot of script. They're doing infrastructure as code. They're getting into the Terraforms, the Ansibles, but also custom scripting. And we've found a number of organizations that are struggling because the team left or the guy left who wrote the scripts. Again, it's an age-old IT story, but can be very impactful these days when you're trying to do things in a faster way, because now your time to recovery is in effect longer. So spend a few minutes there talking about it. Last one I just want to show is a quick, again, discussion around agility versus value. What we're seeing with cloud and multi-cloud is there are multiple steps. And again, what we find is that people will stop somewhere along here. But if they're moving into public cloud, there is a view that we can rehost. They just want to take machines and move them into the cloud, turn off their internal infrastructure. Seriously think about that. Have a long, hard think about what are you doing, what are your applications, how are you using them. But really, this is a costly way of doing things in the short term, and then even more so in the long term. You know, what you want to do is make sure that you are understanding what you're doing and start moving the workloads in a more managed way, which is where you get into the replatforming, looking at how I develop that application, how can I develop it that is then more agile and make it easier to use, and you know, automate the service delivery, maybe tying it into additional third-party tools. And then, you know, down the line, it will be a case of rebuilding, you know, really making it self-service. The applications are fully cloud agnostic, and people can go and pull what they want when they want it and make it available to them. And as you can see there, it helps you move from that ops-centric, where you're thinking more about the machine and the infrastructure, to now thinking about the application and the delivery of a service. And we can help you in those steps with cloud management, and then your container and serverless. And this is where we see that market heading and how we think it's going to step out over the next few years, really. In cloud time, it's going to be the next few months. Things are always changing, but really the next few years. Okay, enough talking, demo time. So let's have a look at the Morpheus interface and just go in and have a look at some of those things that I've been talking about and how Morpheus can help you start to gain control and then further enhance and manage your environment, but also allow you to do that self-service, be it on your internal infrastructure today or your ongoing public cloud capability. So we're going to log in, and I'm logging into a Morpheus at a master tenant level. So I'm going to describe a few things here around Morpheus. We are fully multi-tenanted, and I think that's a good thing to consider as well. And we'll look at that in a moment. What that also ties into is full role-based access control. So remember, I talked about governance. So that's a very key thing for us, and we make great efforts to make sure that works really, really well. We'll look at that. A couple of quick things about the product. People like to understand the product and how it works. It's an on-premise product, so it's something you would take and run within your infrastructure or work with one of your service providers to work with, but you would be in control of the product. It's not software as a service delivered to you by us. You would take this and run it yourselves, so security, management, etc. is fully within your control. I'm logged in as a single administrator at a master tenant level. But what I want to show you is that first thing around governance and control. And I'm going to use a tenant to show you that. I notice all of the menus that I have here, and I have multi-tenancy, and I'm going to drop into a sub-tenant. Now, tenants are really useful, particularly for larger enterprises, for setting up, say, discrete development teams, where you want them to have the ability to go and do self-service and use the multi-clouds, but maybe you have teams that are working on different projects, different data sensitivities, maybe working with different customers. If you're an organization, we do a lot of work with service providers and also development houses who are working with discrete sets of customers themselves, and so they can set up tenancy to control that access. So multi-tenancy is something very much to consider. And what it allows me to do is give access to users that then they cannot see anything else within the infrastructure, be it on the public cloud or the private cloud. I've just logged in to a subtenant, and you can see now that we have branding, which again, we think is very important, that if you take a product like Morpheus, you make sure it's part of your company philosophy. So, you know, branding it up in the way your company looks, using your company logos and color schemes will make sure it's seen as a tool that is used by your organization. But also here you can see the governance and control. So we're not giving everybody access to everything. So Dinesh here, who's a developer, has a very limited range of things that he can do. The main one he can do is provisioning, and he can go into what we call an instance, and he can click on add, and he can start deploying. This is another area that we, want you to consider, and would consider best practices. And there's a number of things around this, but one is you can control here what Dinesh can deploy. Dinesh can only deploy these applications. We're not giving him access to a full Amazon marketplace and Azure marketplace. We're not having to give him access to all of our VMware templates. We're not giving him the ability to build a machine and put an ISO in. What we're saying is, here's our list of applications you can use. These have been proven by the organization. They've been built by the organization. There's a number of ways that you get these images into Morpheus, but one of those could be that your IT operations team have built these out to their standards and have now made those available. So when Dinesh picks CentOS, that's the corporate build of CentOS that he's allowed to use. When he hits next, he now goes through, and now next bit of governance and control is that he has access to a number of clouds. He has no access to these clouds. He can't log on to AWS directly, but you can see here he can go and put a workload in there. And this is the power of Morpheus. I'm giving him access to both internal and private, internal and external infrastructure, but it's all from within one interface. And what I want to show you is that if I pick Amazon or AWS here and pick the plans and the layout, you'll see that he has some things to check. But if any of you have used Amazon, he's not going through a massive range of decisions to try and decide how to deploy this machine. He's going to be asked for a network, he's going to be asked for a plan, and something else to point out here, we pull through the costings. Another area we'll talk about in a moment is cost management, but we're controlling what he can do and also making it very, very easy. I just drop back, what I want to show you is we do that with VMware, for example. So now we're flicking between an internal cloud and an external cloud. Yes, it's slightly different, but it's slightly different. So we're making the user's experience very similar, regardless of which cloud he's using. Now, this is important through the interface, but the other thing that Morpheus has is a full API and a full CLI as well. So this could be done programmatically from external tools, and to pick between the different clouds, he would just be naming the cloud that he wants to deploy in. He's not having to rewrite all his code to support a particular cloud type. So we're really simplifying this process. But again, what I'm doing is limiting what Dinesh can use, what networks he can use, for example, within my VMware infrastructure, what groups I can use, etc. So we're tying him down, giving him great capability, but really limiting what he can do as well without him experiencing that. He can go through, he can select the things that he wants. We can include some other things, but another one that I really like, and this is one to consider, and again, best practices, is particularly if it's a dev environment, one of the things that we've seen customers get, and I think there's a term now called cloud shock, where costs can explode because you've got so many machines running because you're giving people self-service, is we have the ability to start putting lockdown on how long machines can run for, be that number of days. So here, for example, we've got a policy that says when I deploy into this cloud, it's going to run for 1 day. Obviously, for a demo lab, that's great. I want that tidied up, but actually in production or test and dev, that would be a longer period. But we've set up a rule that says after a certain number of days, the user will be notified. I'll get an email. It will tell me that something's going to happen. My machine is going to be deleted, but it will give me the chance to extend that if I need it. But actually what it's going to do is tidy up. Now, again, certain clouds already offer this capability on a cloud-by-cloud basis, but we're offering this across every cloud that you've got, be it internal or external. And expiration is we'll delete, shutdown will power down permanently, power schedule will actually power machines on and off. So if you're concerned about costs or resource management, powering machines down overnight, is a great way to save costs. And if it's a test and dev lab, why is it running when there's nobody around? Power it down, power it back up again in the morning. Hit next, summary, complete, and that goes away. And one final thing we're just showing off here is we also have approval processes as well. Again, this will depend on your requirements. If this is a internal cloud that has some resource, cheap resource, then you may not want anybody to have approval. Just go away, create workload, and we'll just tidy it up as and when. But maybe this is a particular type of machine. It's a database. It's going onto a public cloud. Maybe you want to ask, well, why? So you can have an approval step as you provision, and then have somebody check that. Morpheus has very basic approval capability, one step. If you want more steps, it is possible to do that across multiple applications. Things like ServiceNow provides that sort of capability. But what I'm showing you here, hopefully, and again, best practices is giving my users the ability to go and do this themselves across the clouds that I want them to use, using the tools that they're allowed to use, and controlling all of that. And that's what we see as very much a best practice here. Okay, next I've got a question here regarding the vendor agnostic point. How do you handle internal networks in multi-cloud manner? I think I understand the question, Julian, and it might become more apparent now because I'm going to go and have a look at some of the infrastructures that we support. As we are connected to a cloud, we will bring in the networking capability, and then as an administrator of Morpheus, you can then make those networks available to the customers. So to your users, mark them for public or private use, which tenants, which groups of users, etc. One of the things that Morpheus is not, and again, I see this as best practice, is we're not trying to be the configurator. We're not trying to take over from your vCenter. We're not trying to take over from your AWS control panel. The infrastructure setup, the underlying infrastructure setup, the networking, the storage, the security groups, the VPCs would all still be controlled by a trained cloud administrator, infrastructure administrator. Then that capability is made available through Morpheus for the users of Morpheus to use. You don't want your VMware administrator trying to manage all of your VMware environment through Morpheus. That's not what we're trying to be. We're a cloud orchestration and self-service tool rather than a hypervisor configurator. But I'll come back, Julian. We'll have a look at the networking capabilities. If I don't ask a question, please ask again. So what we're going to look at now, we've come back up to the master tenant level. So I want to just cover off some other areas of capability, but also recommendations. So one of those we've talked about is control of costs. We talked about analytics. That we can do things like setting up reports. So as the users are using the infrastructure, we can understand who's provisioning what, where are they provisioning it, how long is it running for. So we have infrastructure reporting, provisioning, what our instances are running. And if I click on one of these, for example, I've got a report that has been run here, and I can go in and I can see, over this period of February to March 2019, what's been used. Now, an important thing here, we talked about governance control. We talked about, things like auditing and being compliant. So what we're doing here is we're keeping track of every machine that's ever been deployed. This isn't what's running now. This is every machine that's ever been deployed. And so we can see all of those. We can see the resources that we used, so we know who was deploying what. And one of the things you'll notice, another best practice, is something that Morpheus supports, is, for example, naming. That's always a challenge. How do we name instances? So Morpheus has a policy engine where you can set the naming rules, how the machine will be named. So here, for example, it's using the user's initials, so I know who this was that deployed it, the type of machine they were deploying, the group they were deploying into, and then it's given a number, it's given a sequence number, so we can see what was deployed by who and when. Also, what we've got is application costs, cloud costs, so we can actually go in and see how much things are costing us. Behind the scenes, Morpheus has a capture engine that's capturing all of this data. For private clouds, we have an engine where you can put in your own pricing. Again, we'd recommend that. We think it's a good way to think about the way you use resources, put a cost associated with it. You can then start tying budgets to people, to teams. You can actually start limiting what people are spending and say, here's your project that you can go and provision, but there is a cost involved, and we've set a limit of $5,000. 10,000 euros, whatever, on this group of clouds that you can use. So the project has a limit. So we can do all of that. But again, we can go in and we can see costs. And like I say, the data is all here. It's available through reports, but we're also making this available through our API, so you can extract this information. Don't have time and I don't want to go through, but we have analytics, the ability to understand how you're spending money. But one I do want to look at, and again, we see this as a real good use of this type of technology, is the right sizing capability. Again, you're going to give people the ability to provision and go off and self-service. You can put controls around what they can deploy. You can even put limits around what plans they can use. They're always going to have to pick a plan, so you can limit those and make sure they're not going crazy. But in my experience, developers always need more RAM. RAM's expensive, so it's going to be hard to stop them always picking the maximum amount of RAM. But then on the backside, what you can do is be monitoring all of their usage and actually start making right sizing decisions. So we can go in, and what Morpheus is doing is monitoring, and we'll do this across all of the clouds, and this is one of our brownfield capabilities. You can connect us to an existing cloud today, and we will start doing this for you. We will start understanding, how the machine is provisioned now, what it's using on a regular basis from a resource point of view, and start making recommendations around downsizing. So this machine running up on Amazon, we could actually drop it down a plan size. Morpheus won't do that automatically. This is something you would then need to go and execute. And there's a number of ways. I can hit that button, it will go and change that plan, or I could perhaps export this list. Some of our enterprise customers need to do this during change windows, so they would export this list, pass it to their operations team, and they'll go and do that during the Saturday night change window as part of a set of change requests. But keeping track of what we're using across the clouds and then understanding, can we make this better, is a key thing. It's going to be an area that you can save yourself money by doing this correctly. So we very much recommend it. And to support that further, what we've done is we're now adding in the ability to go and get your actual bills from the clouds as well. So here, for example, with Amazon, we can go in and we can start pulling in your actual usage bills across the clouds. You can tie in multiple AWS accounts. If you have one large master account, that's fine. But if you have multiple users or different teams using different accounts, we can bring those all in and start to help you understand how your AWS, your Azure, and the future Google bills are. And then we'll be also adding this capability for your private infrastructures using your private costs as well. While we're here, we'll have a look at this, just have a look at some of these things. So this is where I can connect to a cloud. I'm connected to AWS. It's showing me a number of things. This is a little bit more of an operational panel. This would be the sort of thing your ops guys would use. They can come in, they can look at what VMs are up and running. You can see here that I've got VMs that we call discovered. So we've been connected to an AWS cloud that already exists, and we found these machines and we're showing you them. Can't do much with them. You can make them managed in Morpheus. And then down here, we've got the managed ones. And these are the ones that we have deployed or made managed from that cloud. And we can now interact with those. And you can see there, we're capturing performance data from them. We're bringing log files back in. We can run scripts on them securely, etc. So we have control of those machines. But the operators can come in, look at what's running up there across a bigger piece than a user who's tied down to groups and instances. We also can look at our hosts. Obviously, there's no concept of hosts for a user on AWS, but what there are Docker hosts. Morpheus can deploy and manage Docker and Kubernetes, and that's another area that we would recommend that you consider if you're looking at being more DevOps, doing more agile development. Is containerization is very much taking off. The typical model today is have a separate tool for your Docker clusters, your Kubernetes clusters. Treat it as a separate hypervisor. Morpheus, you're using a single tool across all your clouds with both VMs and containers all in one place. You can control and manage all of those together. You can see here that I have a container option. We've got no containers running up in the cloud at the moment, but so in one place I can look at all of my VMs, all of my containers as well, and I can put costings against those, of course. Another area of integration that we have is, for example, load balancers. So as we're deploying workloads, we want to make them scalable, sit them behind a load balancer. It's very easy to do with Morpheus. You tie us in at the infrastructure level. Administrator would tie us to your F5, your AVI, your your NetScaler, and then the user can select the load balancer during deployment and sit their workload behind there. Morpheus can then help you be auto-scaling based on rules. So again, this tying together of all of the infrastructure pieces to remember that spaghetti diagram, the maze of all of the things that need to be done during the process of orchestrating to make sure it's deployed in the right way, can be handled here by Morpheus. Networking. We've had the question about networking. I think there was a follow-up on it. Quick question. So can we see, let's have a look here, Julian, I just want to touch on this now. For example, we need a service should not be accessible to the internet, so that should go, that would be through AWS panel, for example. We'd need where the service should not be accessible. So I think you're saying there that you're running machines on AWS, but you don't want them available on the internet, so locked down. I think I'm understanding that. So yeah, that's perfectly fine. Most organizations that go heavily into AWS and Azure, as well as a private infrastructure, will set up VPNs or direct connects between them and the public cloud. That's the correct way to do it. You don't really want to be doing things across the public internet. Morpheus absolutely works within that space, so I can be a user sitting inside the organization and deploying on there. If you're going entirely into AWS and you want to do everything in AWS but not make that available through the internet, then run Morpheus, and you want to use Morpheus, what you could do is put Morpheus up on AWS and have it sit inside that private infrastructure. What you then need is just port 443 access to the Morpheus browser for your users to be able to access it. Now, again, if you've got private VPN from your internal network to the AWS environment, then that's very easy to do. But absolutely, security is a very, very important thing. It's probably the most questions I have to answer when I'm going through POC processes and the world of tenders. Always security is a huge concern, particularly now with putting stuff up in the public internet, and we absolutely will work with you on your requirements there. But networking is a key one. Like I say, that's one of the reasons why we really want to leave the core networking to the infrastructure team and just make it easy to use from within Morpheus. Something I just want to touch on, there's a few more questions, I'm going to come back to those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off a couple of other areas and then we'll come back and go through the questions at the end, do a summary. One other thing I just want to show you is best practices. Again, I've mentioned already the library. I just want to show you, this can be somewhat larger. This is a different view. Do you remember you saw the small list of items that Dinesh could deploy? Well, now I have a much, much bigger range. And again, what we're suggesting here and what we're working with our customers to do is this is our list. We provide you with a very usable list of applications that you can deploy. These are a range of open source because we're deploying the code. So, distributing the software. We do have Windows in here. I see a question about Windows support. We'll come back to that in a moment. Absolutely support anything that can be deployed, including full Windows. But the idea is that this is a get you going. This is a sample of the sorts of things you can do. And we would work with you, or you can work with yourselves to build up your own catalog of things that you can deploy. But just to show you again, I can pick Apache now, hit next. Now I can go and pick my group. You see it's a slightly different group because I'm in a different tenant, but now I can deploy Apache into any of these clouds because we've got a build of Apache. The way Morpheus works is we can build up multiple image types behind the library item. And again, this is a a recommendation from us is think about the way you're deploying your apps. If you build them that you can have an app stack that can be deployed into any cloud, suddenly you have the ability to use any cloud rather than being tied into one. So I can deploy this Apache server onto VMware today. Perhaps my test team are working in VMware internally, but I have that same code base, the basic same infrastructure, the same scripts attached, and even down to with blueprinting, WAR files, and everything else like that that can all be deployed into Azure as well. So now I could have a two-stage build, test and dev. Yep, all's good. Now build that app into my public cloud, and it goes onto AWS. And Morpheus will help you do that. And if you remember that staggered approach to cloud adoption and DevOps, that's getting you into the second column of the self-service catalog across multi-cloud, and then moving you also into the third. Seeing this is a much easier way to understand it and using it. It sort of is a difficult concept, but as you can see, I can pick that and deploy it into AWS. I could also deploy it into VMware. The other thing that allows you to do, as I mentioned, is blueprinting. And this is another area that we absolutely recommend you start considering. This is where you would start to build out your multi-tier blueprints. And Morpheus has a full blueprinting engine where we can build these. And the great thing about this is, again, we start using our catalog, and you can start coming in here, and the administrator can then do the configuration. So I can build a version of this that runs on AWS, but I can come in and start locking it down. So now we can start making sure that we're getting a consistent build every time we use something. So I can deploy this AWS instance, and I can make sure it's a container, and I can make sure it's got only 1 gig of storage and 128 megs of memory every time it's deployed, because this is the test piece. And I don't want my engineers going off and doing crazy builds, making test run really, really well, and then when we go into production, it's either hugely expensive or that we need to provision workload that we just can't sustain. So blueprinting is another area that we, building out the multi-tier apps, adding in now my database layer as well, and then tying this down. We'll go with something like let's go with MongoDB, for example. And again, we can build this out. This is going to be locked down to AWS. I can come in and configure this up. So blueprinting is a very, very powerful way of putting, again, more control, consistency, and also building out then your multi-cloud capability. Okay, let's have a look at some of the questions. We're 3/4 of an hour in, so let's have a so the internal networks in multi-cloud, hopefully, Julian, I'll come back, we'll see. We need where the service should not be accessed. Can we see how you do effects on AWS and versus? Can we see how what you do here affects on the AWS account and vice versa? Okay, good question. So yes is the answer. Like I say, we're not really changing the AWS account. We would expect the main function of that to be done. But let's go back to this example here, AWS. If I just edit this, you can see here, this top section is Morpheus metadata. We're giving it a name, something that will mean something to somebody. We're making it available to subtenants potentially. We're then connecting to a particular region. So now we're tying down this piece. We're saying, okay, this connection to AWS is going to be in a particular region. We've got our access key and secret key. And I think this starts to tie in with your question, is we can inventory the existing infrastructure. So we can go and see what's running up on the existing cloud. We then pick whether we want to go EC2 Classic or VPC, which is the more modern way of doing it. We've just added capability to either zone this down to individual VPCs. Maybe you've got a project team, you want them to use a specific VPC for control, or we also have the ability to give the user the ability to pick their VPC at deployment time. So you pick that. But you'll notice I can't create a VPC. Now that's something we're thinking about and working on. Creation of VPCs is probably something that you will want to do in the future for users, so we are adding that. But network security groups and those sorts of things, we're expecting those to be done by the administrator of the cloud. So we're not making big changes to the cloud. What we're going to be doing is deploying workloads in there. If I was logged onto the Amazon control panel, of course, I'm going to see those machines appear. I'll see them there. Machines will get tagged. An important thing for public cloud is tagging. We recommend the use of that. You can do things in Morpheus around reporting with tagging, etc., just as you can in public cloud. So machines will appear and get provisioned and be tagged up on the public cloud, and you'll see that they've come from Morpheus. Likewise, we recommend against it, but you may have people that need to provision workloads directly onto Amazon using the Amazon control panel, in which case you'll see if you have the inventory turned on, you'll see those machines appear in Morpheus. They'll come through as discovered, and they'll appear in that VMware list I showed you earlier, and you could then make them managed under Morpheus if you wanted to. And there's a range of advanced commands under here that you can do, things like making sure that the machine, so here, for example, I've tied Morpheus into my domain, and every time I deploy a machine to this particular cloud, it's going to add the machine to the domain. So again, governance and control. And I can set things like the guidance, whether I want the guidance turned on, whether I want to see the costings, whether I want to update my ServiceNow inventory when I'm deploying machines, and also whether I want to tie this in, for example, to Ansible infrastructure so that I could use Ansible as my configuration management tool. Okay, so let's have a look at some more questions. Quick question: how good is your Windows Server support? Yes, we have very good Windows support. Very much Windows machines. Windows containers are an interesting one. We can't do Windows containers yet. We are focusing on, at the moment, in fact, Kubernetes is the way we're going primarily. That's definitely the one we're getting asked the most about. We haven't actually had anybody really ask us about Windows containers, but Windows servers, absolutely deploying those. But from a base Windows Server template through then building application stacks on there, be it just IIS or SQL Server or deploying a BizTalk server, we can do that. You can integrate with PowerShell and bring PowerShell scripts in and run those during the deployment phase. And that would be done during the instance library. But also more and more, again, like I say, what we're seeing is Ansible being used very much in there, and we tie in very nicely with Ansible for that. Do reports include only what can be provisioned via Morpheus? Can see all resources on a given platform. So that will tie in with the couple of areas. One is, as you just talked about, we were seeing we can inventory existing infrastructure, bring that through. If we inventory and we see it, we can report on it. So that's one thing there. The thing about how does it work when resources are built using CloudFormation or Terraform's templates? Well, you'll be pleased to know that we support those. I didn't really show it to you, but when I clicked on templates here, I actually have a range of different templates. Terraform's great, really good. It actually works for us. It's a really good combination because it works at a slightly lower level than Morpheus. It works probably more at the infrastructure level. So actually it's a really nice tie-in for us. So that's good. ARM and CloudFormation, obviously, if you're doing specific things that you really want to just focus on Amazon or Azure, they're there. We support them. You can bring them in, import them. Just to show you, for example, Terraform. If I give it a Terraform name, we'll bring that in. We tie into your Git. You can either just bring in a Terraform template and paste it into Morpheus, or you can go and get it from a Git repository and drop it in here. We then will parse out any variable inputs and during deployment show you and request those. You can also tie us into our Cypher server for secret management, that type of thing. If you're deploying workload on there, what they will do, again, if they won't appear as Morpheus instances. Morpheus has this concept of everything that we provision directly appears as instances. Instances are single or multiple machines. You can see here, for example, there's a MongoDB instance that's got 7 machines. It's a full cluster of MongoDB databases. Obviously, this is all appearing in here. If I deployed that MongoDB using Terraforms, it wouldn't appear in here immediately. It would appear as a discovered machine, but I could then go through the process of bringing it into Morpheus and making it a managed machine and tagging it as an instance type. And so we could do that. There are certain things. There are some very cloud native things, just to make you aware of that. There are some cloud native things that Amazon can do and stuff that we don't have direct access to and direct control, particularly the microservices. We're seeing that people are looking to go down the route of microservices, Lambda, that type of thing. We don't currently support that. That's in our roadmap. That's probably in the 3 to 6 month window before we start doing the microservices type capability. But we're actually seeing customers potentially leapfrog containerization and go from thick traditional VMs to the microservices sort of capability. And so we want to make sure that we support you on that journey. So template time on the Windows container support, I don't have a timetable for that. Like I say, it's not something we've been asked for. If it's something that is of interest to you, I'd be very interested in talking to you and understanding it and what your requirement is. A little bit about Morpheus as an organization, I've already covered that. We are a young organization, young business. We've probably been selling product for 3 years, but the product's actually been in development over the last 6 to 8 years in a DevOps environment. That's why we sort of hopefully can bring you this best of breed tool for this cloud management, cloud orchestration, because we've come from that type of background. The development team had developed it, actually had to go and take on 12 or 14 different infrastructures, all running on different types of cloud, and get hold of those and manage those in a sensible way. So we build and we work in a very agile way. Like I say, we do not have Windows container support directly on the map at the moment, but if it's something that customers are starting to show interest in, and it's something that Microsoft are making easy, and I noticed there's some changes in Microsoft recently. They historically have made it very difficult. Hyper-V, for example, is a very difficult hypervisor to work with. We do it, but from a cloud management point of view, Hyper-V is more complex than VMware. But we work with it and make it work very well. But as long as they make that container support easy to support, we can probably look at doing something in the future, depending on requirements. So, Tero, if you're interested, please reach out to the guys at Nordicmind, and we can get on a conversation. And I'd love to understand your usage there. Okay, we're coming up to the hour. We've answered quite a few questions there. I've gone through a number of areas. There's an awful lot of other areas, but I just wanted to give you those key touch points. Multi-cloud is something that is happening. I think you need to decide. I don't think everybody's going to move entirely 100% into the cloud personally. I think that's a strange dream. We know IT is various, it's changing all the time, but there's some great power. And depending on your business decision, you may go stay entirely 100% internal. You may decide to use a third party. Up in the Nordics region, there's a number of great service providers offering private cloud in effect in a managed service type environment. And we work with a number of those. And that's a great methodology. Maybe then rather than going to an AWS or Azure, look at using a local, secure service provider in the space. So that's a way to go. But some customers we have, I met a very large enterprise in the UK about a year ago, and they'd moved everything into Azure, 100%. All data centers gone globally. I think they had about 8 global data centers, all gone, all in Azure, all tied in, and that was their methodology. And there will be people that do that. But I think more likely we're going to see this hybrid cloud methodology, and then recommendation is make sure that you understand what you're doing, put your governance and control in place, but make it very easy to use. Otherwise, what we're seeing is people going off and doing the go and get their own account because it's just too painful to do anything through central IT. With that, I'm going to wrap up the call. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if people want to ask any more questions. I'm happy if you want to ask in the questions if there's any more areas you'd like to see, if there's anything on the menu that you saw me flicking through. Like I say, I really haven't had a chance to go through all of the integrations. Just to show you before I do finish, just to finish off, I just want to show you, if you're thinking about what clouds do we support, this is the cloud list. So on the public cloud, we have everything through Alibaba, Amazon, Azure, through a number of other public clouds, some of them quite European focused actually. And then on the private side, we have everything through Azure Stack. Hyper-V, I mentioned that, SCVMM, Nutanix, which is Acropolis native, OpenStack we're seeing quite a bit of in some larger government projects, and then VMware, VMware vCenter, of course, but vCloud Director for our service providers as well, Zen Server. So hopefully you can see something on there that meets your needs. And like I say, very happy to have a conversation with you. Go into a deeper demo would be a great next step to go and answer specific questions for you. Like I say, thank you very much for attending this morning. Hopefully that's been useful. If you have any further questions, like I say, I'll be here for a few more minutes. And if you want to ask for a particular view of a particular function you've seen in Morpheus, please do so. But thank you.